It was relatively simple for Jerry to gain access to the house without being noticed. He was able to circumvent the front entrance by accessing the basement through the rear. It was not possible to enter from the front due to the presence of an alarm system that had been installed at the insistence of his wife, Shelley. This system was designed to be triggered for reasons that were not entirely clear to Jerry, who was subjected to persistent demands from Shelley until he finally installed the system. It was also capable of opening a garage door. The delay on the keypad was set to 10 seconds as requested by Shelley. 45 seconds is an excessive amount of time. The perpetrator will have sufficient time to gain access to the bedroom before the system is activated, she informed him. Jerry attempted to make light of the situation, suggesting that his partner was merely attempting to provide his boyfriend with an opportunity to escape through the window. However, Shelley simply laughed at his joke and returned to preparing dinner. Despite the apparent logic, Jerry reset the delay, inadvertently setting off the alarm each time he returned home. However, this was only a temporary inconvenience, lasting a few seconds until he could exit the vehicle and enter the house. The digit code should be checked daily to ensure its functionality. On one occasion, Shelley entered the house with a smile, having encountered numerous difficulties in disabling the system. The same issue occurred with the windows, which were also under her control. However, Jerry was aware that no one would notice the wire he had placed in the top of the door frame, bypassing the sensor. Shelley rarely visited the basement, and even if she did, Jerry doubted she would have noticed when he tested the system. The panel illuminated correctly, and all the cables were reliable. The door did not emit any sound, and the hinges, which he had oiled, moved with ease. The same can be said for the steps, each of which he had carefully nailed almost a week ago. Shelley was pleased with this outcome, as she had been requesting for months that he repair the unstable steps. He had tested their strength with his 100 cog, and they did not creak or groan. The small, high-standard .22 caliber pistol he had tucked into his windbreaker, which hung on hooks at the top of the stairs, held 9 rounds. It felt satisfying to reach into his pocket and he would ascertain its whereabouts. Jerry had no intention of shooting anyone unless he had to, but he had no intention of retreating either. Something was going on, and he was determined to find out what it was. There was no point in sorting things out with his wife, Shelley, as she would deny everything. If he was wrong, he would look foolish. He was concerned about 3 years of trying to impregnate her and 3 years of failure. He even went to the doctor to get it checked and was ridiculed when the old doctor told him to try not to hug strange women. Furthermore, he was fertile and in fact, excessively so. The old doctor was visibly amused by his own joke, patted Jerry on the shoulder, and advised him to consult with her. It was Shelley's turn, but instead, she sought the advice of her own doctor, the same one she had been using since before their wedding. She insisted on this as well, that day. Jerry happened to see her leaving the hairdresser. Otherwise, he might not have suspected anything unusual. She was supposed to be at her doctor's appointment, but instead, she was undergoing a hair and nail treatment, but Jerry was merely preparing for his occupational duties and was already 5 minutes behind schedule. It was not until he reached his parking area that he became aware of the situation. It had occurred just 1 month prior, that evening, when she informed him with a despondent expression that it was possible that she could have children, but that it was unlikely. He held her until she became calm, experiencing a sense of nausea in her abdomen. She advised him to persevere, but her tone was not entirely accurate or truthful. It was at this moment that Jerry began to pay closer attention. He had never considered the black woman from the hair salon to be sufficiently qualified to provide advice to Shelley on such matters. This was tantamount to treason. It was simply not possible. Shelley was always home. There were no indications to the contrary. When he returned, she was always there. Of course, there were occasional overnight trips, which he had to make 2 or 3 times a month. Could it be that she was addicted to something and was hiding it? This was also implausible. She appeared and acted as healthy as a horse. She even had an extra kilo or 2 on her rotund body. Could gambling be the answer? It is possible that she could engage in gambling at Indian casinos. However, a cursory examination of her financial records revealed no irregularities, despite the fact that Shelley was a parsimonious individual. Nevertheless, she made regular visits to the salon, spending approximately $50 on manicures and other treatments. However, on that particular day, Shelley's nails appeared to be in good condition. Jerry was perplexed by this aspect of her behavior. He had heard her exclaim, "Damn, I broke my nail at least 50 times," later that evening while Shelley was taking a shower. Jerry proceeded to search through her belongings, including her dresser drawers and closet. Shelley possessed a collection of exquisite garments that Jerry had never seen before. The drawer contained a small bag of panties, which he found curious. He had never seen them before, either, but even this was not unusual. When they went out to dinner or dancing, beautiful outfits and tiny panties always appeared. Jerry found it enjoyable when Shelley came out and posed, appreciating his admiration of her appearance. This woman could undoubtedly attract the attention of many people, and it was evident that she was aware of her allure. He chuckled to himself, almost wishing it wasn't Saturday night. He felt pride while dancing with her, and later, he was confident that he would be able to remove her outer layers of clothing and discover her innermost self. He discovered birth control pills. He blushed and attempted to compose himself before she exited the shower. His instinct was to reprimand her, but he had learned to verify everything first. Many years prior, he had discovered Dana, his then-girlfriend, kissing another man at a party. Jerry was prepared to confront Dana with his concerns, and he sensed that she was contemplating doing the same. They even met her parents, and the atmosphere was palpably serious. He observed her engaging in a passionate kiss with a man, her body pressed firmly against his. This was not at all like a friendly kiss on the cheek. He stood there in shock as he watched her greet the man with evident excitement. Jerry approached and forcefully grabbed the man, causing him to fall to the ground. The man turned out to be a brother, whom Jerry had never met. He had just returned home from college for the weekend. The meeting with her brother was supposed to be the main surprise of the evening. Therefore, although despite her previous mention of a sibling, Dana remained silent regarding his scheduled appearance that evening, following his expulsion from the family residence. She did not respond to his repeated telephone calls, having only recently initiated a romantic relationship with him. In fact, his arrival that evening was not merely a possibility, it was a certainty. Dana initiated a kiss and then placed a prophylactic device in his shirt pocket, giving him a sly look. His assault on his brother in front of the entire family effectively ended the situation. The actions of Jerry serve as a valuable lesson. He had to travel a little to fulfill his duties. His role involved ordering fences for farmers' sheds and paddocks. On occasion, he also designed a series of pens himself, enabling farmers to process their cattle, separate them for trips to auction or for medical care, and so forth. The position offered numerous opportunities for professional growth and the chance to interact with a diverse range of individuals. Additionally, the work was conducted in an outdoor setting. His final role was particularly noteworthy, as he not only sold nearly 4 miles of fence but also received an invitation to share a meal with his new colleagues. The meal consisted of ham and black bean cornbread, a notable contrast to the typical fare available at the farm. Sam Martin was a tall and thin man with a rough exterior. He wore faded red long johns, which were visible beneath his unbuttoned heavy-duty work pants. His wife Dewey was plump and happy, with a smile that never seemed to leave her face. By the end of the day, having toured the entire ranch on Honda ATVs, Sam and Jerry had become close friends. They shared a love for hunting and fishing. In a way, Sam became a father figure to Jerry, who had never had one in his life. It is difficult to comprehend how this could happen in one lifetime. On that day, 2 men were engaged in conversation about a multitude of topics. However, an unanticipated turn of events occurred. The couple had a daughter, who was approximately 19 years of age and possessed notable physical beauty, even when attired in a flannel shirt and blue jeans. It was evident that she was a young woman of considerable charm. She also exhibited a keen interest, yet it was clear that Jerry was already married, thus eliminating any possibility of a romantic involvement. Her name was Molly. The following day, he found himself contemplating her throughout his journey home. He considered her to be a commendable individual, the kind that a man might wish to become better acquainted with. Their ranch was situated amidst rolling hills with an abundance of fresh water, and Sam had been raising herds there for many years. He had been in need of a robust fence and several substantial sheds elevated on stilts. As time passed, the boundaries of his land were increasingly encroached upon by the encroachment of the outside world. New residents had appeared, and they were displeased by the fact that cows and sheep traversed their lawns and flower gardens with impunity. Consequently, he was compelled to choose between constructing fences or allowing the land to be overrun by residential development. He opted for the former, a decision that proved to be one of his most lucrative to date. However, the disadvantage of Jerry's profession was that the majority of the larger farms were situated at a considerable distance, leading him to frequently find himself the distance from his residence to the site of his work was approximately 300 miles. The company provided compensation for his lodging and meals during his travels. Instead of returning home directly from work, Jerry typically rented a motel room and returned the following day. However, on this occasion, circumstances were different. Sam and Dewey urged him to stay overnight, leading him to the spacious bedroom on the upper floor. The silence of the room made it challenging for Jerry to fall asleep at times as he heard the sounds of sheep or cows. Each time, the auditory stimuli served as a reminder of the passage of time. The night was warm, and Jerry removed the blanket from his bed at approximately 2 a.m. At approximately midnight hours, he arose to utilize the restroom facilities. En route to the corridor, he encountered another bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and a night light was illuminating the interior. Molly was positioned on top of the blanket, and her lower body was in shadow. One bare breast was clearly outlined in the dim light of the night lamp. She appeared to be asleep, yet the scene was markedly erotic. Jerry recognized that she was undoubtedly a physically attractive young woman, yet he also swiftly averted his gaze. It was inappropriate to clandestinely observe her in such a manner. On his way to upon returning to the bedroom, he observed that the door was now closed. He experienced a sudden rush of embarrassment, realizing that he must have been discovered watching her. The following morning, Sam and Dewey instructed him to sit at the kitchen table. The table was laden with an impressive array of eggs, ham, and potatoes, which he found to be exceptionally flavorful. He inquired about the provenance of these ingredients, and Sam informed him that they were grown on the family's 16-hectare plot on the northern ridge. As he took a second helping, Sam noticed his satisfied expression. Molly then entered the room, surveying her surroundings and yawning. She was clad in blue jeans and she was wearing a flannel shirt, which accentuated her appearance in a remarkable manner. She then directed a sly look at Jerry, raising one eyebrow in a seductive manner, which caused him to blush. Dewey observed the interaction between them and grinned. He then proceeded to look back and forth between them. After breakfast, Jerry gathered his belongings, placed the contract and a substantial check in his briefcase, and departed. He reflected on the remarkable hospitality he had experienced and considered the possibility of integrating into this lifestyle. He realized that he could potentially achieve a state of contentment by emulating the lifestyle of these people. As he was leaving, Dewey handed him a loaf of cornbread. He then entered his vehicle and expressed his gratitude, indicating his anticipation of dining on the lengthy journey home. Molly observed the proceedings from the porch, grasping the railing with one hand. Jerry acknowledged her presence with a wave as he initiated the engine, and she reciprocated the gesture throughout the journey. He contemplated her image, attempting to divert his attention, yet the recollection of her repose in a state of undress persisted in his mind. Shelley maintained a commendable standard of cleanliness and was consistently available for physical affection during his visits. However, these sojourns seldom exceeded a single occasion. After a lengthy excursion, Jerry was gratified to return home. However, following overnight trips, he observed a peculiar phenomenon. His partner, Shelley, exhibited a heightened level of affection, seemingly more pronounced than usual. Despite her 28 years of age, Shelley maintained a youthful physique. Her blonde hair was styled in a short updo, and her upper body was well developed. Additionally, she pursued a career in real estate commission sales, a demanding yet lucrative field. In certain months, she surpassed his income, though this was an uncommon occurrence. In recent years, she experienced periods of prolonged inactivity, with a month or two between sales. Nevertheless, Jerry was confident in his ability to provide for their shared needs. He could use a new truck. His old Dodge Ram was still in good condition, but it was starting to show its age. He could wait to purchase a new vehicle because the payments were already taken care of. He had sex with Shell a couple of times a week, and she was consistently pleased. He felt that their life together was quite good. Of course, there were a few things he would like to improve, but he did his best. The last sexual encounter ended in the same way that Shelley was waiting for him and was ready for love and pleasure. A few minutes later, they were in the bedroom. The sheets were fresh and crisp, as always. Upon returning home, Jerry managed the situation effectively, despite a persistent, though ultimately inconsequential, concern. While occupied with professional responsibilities, Jerry's thoughts were preoccupied with numerical data and intricate plans. He did not dwell on his recent discoveries. Instead, he was preoccupied with other matters. He lacked concrete evidence to substantiate his hypothesis. It is plausible that Shelley had 2 appointments that day, one with a physician and another at a beauty salon. She may have purchased new attire and intimate undergarments, preparing a surprise for him. This phenomenon occurred on multiple occasions. She would emerge from the bathroom, dressed to the nines, taking part in a nice dinner, and would perform a little twirl while showcasing a new dress or display a tiny thong with a grin. However, this nagging suspicion did not leave him. He was compelled to ascertain the truth. The use of birth control pills meant that she had lied to him. His concern was not only because she did not want a child. He made changes that would allow him to check and find out. He did it right in front of her, and she did not even notice. The night was suddenly filled with chaos. Jerry drove past. He observed his house and noted the presence of an unfamiliar vehicle. His partner was not present, though he did not anticipate her arrival given the proximity of neighbors. The upstairs bedroom was illuminated and the curtains were drawn tightly. He was left with a sense of unease, along with the discovery of a packet of birth control pills in her underwear drawer. This incident marked the beginning of a series of events that would challenge his perceptions. If one senses deception, it is often in close proximity. His mother had imparted this wisdom. On numerous occasions, Jerry had detected a peculiar odor at the top of the stairs. He listened intently, but the only sound he could discern was the rhythmic splashing of a shower. It was a rather unusual occurrence, given that it was nearly 2 in the morning. He anticipated that she would either be asleep or engaged in some form of activity. If she was indeed awake, this would be the optimal time to interact with her. He had informed her that his professional obligations were in Idaho, which meant that he would not be able to return home until late the following day. Moreover, there was a lucrative position in Idaho that he had recently secured through a telephone sale. Sam and his wife Dee were delighted with the initial position that they offered him was not one that he was able to accept. Despite being invited to join them, he was required to participate in an auction for a much smaller role in a nearby production. He briefly considered the possibility of accepting the role, as it would allow him to earn more money and potentially spend time with Molly again. However, he quickly dismissed this idea, as he was not feeling entirely himself at the time. He was preoccupied with thoughts that he considered to be irrational, and he found himself standing on the top step of his own house, contemplating work and a woman he had met. He was aware that he barely knew her and that she was armed. He was close to simply retreating and sneaking out of the house, but he had to know everything for sure. If Shell did not do anything, he could just sneak away and forget about it. However, what if she did something? Jerry was unsure of what he would do if there was someone there with her. He was preoccupied with the thought that she was having an affair, although there was no evidence of this. He felt a sense of sadness. He stood there for a long time, feeling foolish. He listened, and the only sound he could hear was the sound of the shower indicated that Shelley often spent as much as half an hour in the shower, so this was not unusual. Finally, he slowly pushed the door open, not really expecting to find anything. A man was sitting on the edge of a fairly rumpled bed with his back to the door. He was fully dressed and reading a magazine. It was actually Jerry's popular science magazine. Jerry's eyes turned red. The shower was still running. The man turned the page of the magazine. "Who the hell are you?" Jerry asked, entering the room. The man jumped as if someone had prodded him in the posterior and turned around, looking at Jerry in astonishment. It was Art Barnes, manager of the local bank that Shell's real estate agency used to finalize transactions. Art Barnes was approximately 50 years of age, with grey hair at the temples and imposing figure, a larger man than Jerry. Jerry was aware that if there were any lucrative deals being negotiated in town, Barnes would be situated nearby. He was also cognizant that although Barnes was formidable and expedient, he would likely sustain some losses if he engaged in this particular transaction. "It's not what it seems," Barnes interjected. At that moment, he observed the firearm in Jerry's possession, his eyes widening in fear. You came to my residence to assume possession of my wife in my bed, Jerry growled at him. That is not what happened. Jerry then raised the firearm and pointed it at the man. The man threw the magazine and rushed to attack. This was a complete surprise to Jerry, who expected the man to retreat and move away. It is likely that the man would have reached Jerry before he could discharge his weapon, but he was on the other side of the bed and had to emerge from behind it. Jerry discharged his firearm twice. The man fell, emitting a loud groan. What was it he heard? He recalled Shell's scream, and then the bathroom door swung open. She was completely naked and wet. Who is this man? What is he doing here? Jerry shouted at her. Her hand came up to cover her mouth as she looked at Barnes groaning on the floor. Honey, it's not what it seems, she said, looking up. Are you there, washing your ass to keep it clean for this bastard? Jerry shouted. No, honey. We were just going to talk. That's all. It was 00 in the morning in our bedroom. She was naked. He had simply needed to take a shower. Her eyes filled with horror as she realized he was lying. Barnes was then observed by Jerry, who emitted a loud moan. Barnes's eyes were observed to be full of fear as he looked at Jerry. He then shouted, "Do not kill me, please." He was observed to be in a state of fear for a moment, and then he was observed to be thinking about shooting Barnes. However, he decided against it. Jerry then told him to deliver a strong blow to Barnes's head. Barnes fell silent. Jerry then observed that he felt calm and collected. It was as if all of this was happening to someone else. He then approached Shelley, who was observed to be. He inquired as to whether the ordeal was worth it, but she did not respond. Instead, she gazed at him with wild eyes. He then muttered an expletive and proceeded to the nightstand, where he picked up the phone. He informed the operator that he had discovered an intruder in his wife's bedroom and had shot him. His wife had sustained injuries during a physical altercation. He requested that an ambulance be sent to the residence. He then placed the pistol in his belt and proceeded downstairs. I inspected the refrigerator and discovered 6 cans of beer, as was to be expected. Shelley had procured the groceries on the countertop, where an unopened bag of chips and a jar of mixed nuts, which Jerry was particularly fond of, were laid out. Jerry took possession of these items and proceeded to the living room, seating himself in a position that afforded him a view of the bottom of the stairs. He reflected on the recently acquired position and began calculating the potential financial implications. The pistol, however, caused him discomfort, prompting him to relocate it to a more comfortable position on his side. I could hear Shelley's sobs emanating from upstairs, prompting me to. He proceeded to the television and activated it. Despite the presence of other individuals engaged in conversation, he was unable to discern the nature of their discussion. The chips were palatable and freshly prepared. He had consumed 2 beers and was in the process of consuming half a bag of chips when he heard the sirens. He surmised that the emergency responders were not in a hurry. On his way to the police station, he was displeased to find that he was not permitted to take a jar of nuts with him. Furthermore, he was subjected to rough treatment by the authorities, who observed him eating chips and subsequently discovered a firearm tucked into his belt suddenly became a weapon, and everyone screamed. One policeman reached down and took the gun. Jerry was just stuffing another chip into his mouth when he was grabbed and thrown to the floor. His hands were twisted behind his back. He complained that he was being hurt, but no one answered. He was told to be quiet. Later, when he asked for his can of nuts, Jerry was told to be quiet by his lawyer, who informed him that Jerry did not know this man and had never needed a lawyer. Prior to this, one of the other inmates had mentioned Mercer McLaren, Hansen, Ireland, and Phillips. When Jerry listed these names, it appeared to him that the man had spent a considerable amount of time discussing legal matters with various lawyers. He had employed the services of Jack Ireland, whom he considered to be an excellent lawyer. Jerry inquired as to why the man was still incarcerated, receiving only a sideways glance in return. However, he was in need of legal counsel, so he contacted a lawyer. Jack Ireland was a short and stocky man who carried a severely worn briefcase. He perused the charges and shook his head. "What is next?" he inquired. "A bail hearing will facilitate the necessary funds," the man replied. "There is sufficient equity in your home to cover it. Then, we must await the grand jury's hearing of the case." "How serious is it?" the man pressed. If you are going to shoot someone, do so. If you don't, he will testify against you. You are in complete control of the situation. I cannot believe you used that little gun. You should have obtained a magnum or something more powerful. He snorted slightly at this assessment. How bad is it? It's with them, Jerry said. Nobody told him anything. Your wife will be fine, just a hole in her side. Barnes is pretty beat up. Those little .22 cartridges tend to burst, so he spent a lot of time in surgery. Tell me why you shot him a second time. He was still attacking me. Well, that shot looks deliberate. You hit him below the belt. Ireland said, looking at him sideways. Great, Jerry answered categorically. This prompted another snort from the lawyer. Magnum would have blown them clean off, but you just made a hole. Between them, he emitted another snort. It was almost a month before bail was released from incarceration, and Jerry was permitted to venture outside once more. The air was so fresh that it was almost unexpected. It smelled so different from the air he was accustomed to. He was already accustomed to the smell. He could not go home. The court forbade him to do so, citing a distance of 100 meters. However, Jerry did not care. Shelley lived there, having been released from the hospital long before he was released from prison. However, he beat Shelley to signing the papers. The place was named Shelley. It was possible that either Jacobson or Gerald Jacobson could have signed the papers. This was one of those minor details in the context of the law. He was pleased to discover this when he saw that they had signed the papers. He was surprised that Shelley was taking part in this process. He now understood her motivation, but it seemed that this detail had escaped her attention as she was in the hospital. Jack Ireland was a competent lawyer, and he wanted to ensure that he received his fee. Therefore, if Shelley wished to retain the apartment, she would have to pay a certain sum. Bills. Jack Ireland had made a significant deposit on his apartment. Jerry was financially constrained. He had utilized his savings account to retain legal counsel, fully cognizant that the fee represented merely the initial installment. He was also aware that this decision would likely elicit displeasure from Shelley, yet he remained undeterred. His vehicle was situated in the same location where he had left it, situated down the street and around the corner. He believed the mileage to be in excess of 100 miles, consistent with the restraining order. However, he was uncertain about the number of parking citations on the vehicle, which included at least a dozen. It was surprising that the vehicle had not been ticketed for parking violations more frequently. The vehicle had not yet been towed. Jerry took the tickets and discarded them. What recourse did he have? Would they arrest him at the office? Jerry entered to speak with his superior. He appeared visibly nervous. He informed Jerry that they no longer required his services, citing his unavailability as the reason for his dismissal. Jerry was already aware of this decision, having seen the articles in the newspapers that night. He retired to his vehicle, seeking solace in its familiar surroundings. The location was South Park. It seemed like fate was playing a cruel joke on the place. The following day, he contacted a lawyer and, through the intervention of Jack Ireland, was accompanied by a police officer in the retrieval of some of his belongings. This experience may have served to reframe his perception of the lawyer in question. Shelley was not present during this visit. Jerry proceeded to gather his personal effects, including his attire, musical instruments, fishing equipment, and a collection of coins. He contemplated the acquisition of a new television set but was constrained by the absence of an appropriate outlet in the remote location. As he departed, he observed the jar of mixed nuts that had been left behind. He then proceeded to retrieve the aforementioned item from the rack situated adjacent to the chair. He proceeded to peruse the refrigerator, but decided against removing the last 5 bottles of beer due to the disapproving gaze of the police officer. He then proceeded to alter the access code to the alarm system to a different sequence on the porch. The police officer did not even notice. He then allowed himself a moment of mirth at the seemingly trivial act of purchasing 2 guitars and all of his fishing rods, with the exception of one, which he retained for himself, from a local store for the sum of $500. He had no other means of financial compensation. He proceeded to the post office, where he and Shelley had rented a mailbox. His key proved ineffective, and Shelley removed it and replaced it with a new one. However, they retained possession of his mail. The clerk was unaware of this arrangement and attempted to comply with the posted instructions. Upon seeing him, however, she was visibly fearful and handed him the mail directly, which included several credit card applications. Additionally, he rented another box and completed the necessary paperwork, indicating his new address to the court. He contemplated simply departing, but given that he was driving a large yellow Dodge Ram cab, he reasoned that he would be easily identifiable. 2 weeks later, Jerry remained unemployed. His somber demeanor had been featured in the news for several days, with newspapers reporting on an enraged and unstable husband who had stormed into a business meeting and opened fire. This account of events was provided by Art Barnes, a prominent local businessman. Barnes had sought legal counsel and was advised that, should he resort to violence, he should ensure that his intended victim was killed. Otherwise, the situation could potentially spiral out of control. Upon returning to South Park, his new residence, Jerry drove his truck into the bushes, positioning it at a safe distance from the street. He then proceeded to fish, catching half a dozen grasshoppers. He caught a dozen small trout, measuring 15 centimeters in length, from a nearby stream to keep. The legal minimum length was 20 centimeters, but he was unconcerned about the specifics. He built a small fire and roasted them. As he was putting the frying pan into the stream, his mobile phone rang. It was his former boss, sounding sweet and friendly. What the hell, thought Jerry, remembering that job he had done fencing on Sam Martin's farm in Idaho. He had certainly done more than 4. The property in question encompasses 000 hectares, with the intention of fencing the larger area with a transverse fence, constructing 2 barns and extending the fence to the city limits. This will be the most extensive project the company has ever undertaken. What does this have to do with me? Jerry inquired, still harboring resentment over the way he had been treated. However, recent experiences had led him to believe that everyone treated him in a manner that was less than satisfactory. Martin insists on spending all his time in the park alone, stating that if he cannot do so, he will hire someone else. While this may be a commendable gesture, Jerry was aware that he should not have left the state. His superior inquired as to his thoughts on the matter. Jerry was initially uncertain about how to respond. However, he then realized that perhaps the best course of action would be to suggest an alternative. He replied, "Maybe I should go back to my job." His superior then asked, "Would you consider returning to your position and accepting double commissions?" Jerry agreed, and the discussion concluded with a proposal for him to resume his previous role. Time is a valuable commodity. It is, therefore, prudent to ensure that one is not in possession of any weapons. I am not permitted to carry one myself. The police confiscated mine, which understandably caused me considerable distress. However, I did not resort to shooting indiscriminately. I only shot 2 people. I was not a psychopath, I was merely firing in all directions when something irritated me. However, the newspapers presented a distorted image of the incident. What about The remuneration package was unfair when I was dismissed. I was unable to provide an explanation. This was for several months, plus half of my benefits. Jerry was aware that he was the company's most successful salesperson. He hesitated, and his actions indicated that he was considering the situation carefully. He was also aware that the profit would be only 83 cents per half meter, but he did not object. The property encompassed 000 hectares, an extensive expanse of hedges and sheds. One of the sheds was 30 by 18 meters in size. The quality of the work was deemed unsatisfactory, and the boss agreed. Jerry proceeded to purchase a jar of mixed nuts at a local convenience store to celebrate. He also procured a bottle of beer, which was prohibited on the premises. However, he did not adhere to the prohibition and consumed the beer rapidly, discarding the bottle. The judge, who was acquainted with Jerry, regarded him and his lawyer with a certain degree of suspicion. However, he granted their request to cross state lines as part of their work. Furthermore, he required them to return every evening. You are facing some serious charges, Mr. Jacobson. However, I cannot deprive a person of the right to do their job until the case is resolved. Therefore, I advise you not to compromise this right, or I will have no choice but to remand you back to jail. Yes, Your Honor, replied Jerry, who managed to maintain a serious demeanor the following day as he set off for Idaho. Old Martin greeted him with a smile and a handshake. It was evident that the news had not yet reached him, and Jerry saw no reason to bring up the topic. We plant corn in that little spot by the creek. The soil there is of good quality. We must ensure that the sheep do not approach him. Then there are the Angus, which we kept free range. However, there is a great deal of construction work going on, and I am simply tired of hearing the screaming. Therefore, we intend to keep them on our land. It seemed to me that this elderly man must have a great deal of money. By the time they got back to the ranch house, it was almost 8 o'clock. In the evening, Jerry was aware that he needed to depart to return to Oregon before midnight. He was reluctant to forego dinner and the opportunity to see Molly again, but he was compelled to leave. He subsequently returned to Oregon, where he attempted to contact her but only received an automated voice response. He then called again as soon as the bail office opened. You are not required to call on a daily basis. Instead, adhere to the established regulations, the automated voice stated. He was informed that this was the case. He replied that it was unlikely that any checks would be made unless something occurred that caught the attention of the relevant authority. He then got back into his vehicle and drove back to the Martin farm. He drove at a high speed and upon arrival noticed Molly sitting on the porch. She jumped up and ran inside. A few seconds later, she returned with a large hat and a basket. She was wearing cut-off blue jeans and a t-shirt. She informed him that she had not worn a bra, as her breasts were visible beneath her shirt. She then climbed into the truck. She explained that her father had instructed her to show him the area near the construction site so that he could take measurements. She noted that everyone was occupied with cutting hair. He inquired about the nature of the haircut. She replied that it was a sheep. She added that everyone would remain busy until dark. It took over an hour to reach the area in question. Cattle were observed wandering around, seemingly unaware of their presence. During the journey, they discussed a range of topics. He intermittently glanced at her, displaying clear interest. The way her soft breasts bounced every time they went over a bump they drove through open fields indicated the absence of a road. Only the occasional streak of what looked like ATV tracks was visible. He considered that it had been a considerable length of time since he had been with a woman, but he dismissed this thought. His priority was work, and he was reluctant to do anything that would upset her parents. Jerry came to a large rise in the trail. There was a fairly large river, and approximately half a mile away, there was a row of 3. The apartment buildings were situated in a location that was somewhat incongruous with the surrounding environment, which appeared to be a wilderness area. On the other side of the buildings, he observed a highway with cars moving at high speeds. He considered the implications of this development, which he saw as an example of progress. He was aware that livestock grazing laws were not a significant concern in this context, as the fence separating the property from the neighboring area extended up to the city limits. He considered himself fortunate, as he owned the riverbank on both sides, which meant he had access to the creek. He switched to four-wheel drive. The vehicle then proceeded along the fence line, using the speedometer to gauge the distance. Upon reaching the main residence, the driver sat down and calculated the time it would take for the entire team to complete the task. After a period of several weeks, the work was finally finished. The driver then looked at Molly, who was sitting in a chair with her legs crossed. She was seated on a chair, her top leg swinging back and forth, her shoe dangling from her toes. Everyone was downstairs in the lower barn, and they would not return for several hours. Would she like to go upstairs? She smiled. Jerry blushed at her boldness but knew he could not refuse. He was still married, they lived separately, and he barely knew her. He apologized and asked if she was engaged. Divorced, yes. It is most likely, in fact, that he is divorced. It is clear that the two were not compatible, and what was the cause of the divorce? I shot her, he admitted. You shot her and her lover? Molly's eyebrows rose. Yes. They were at my house in my bedroom. It is clear that I don't blame you. Did you kill them? No, Jerry answered. Please elucidate the rationale behind your departure last night, which necessitated your return to Oregon. Is this a recurring necessity? Until the conclusion of the trial, it is probable that I will be incarcerated. However, this remains to be seen. Please specify the nature of your proposed accompaniment. I am not intimidated by you. In fact, I consider you to be an exemplary individual. However, I am uncertain as to whether you are the optimal choice for this undertaking. I am not opposed to the idea of accompanying you to Oregon. I am not fearful of you. In fact, I consider you to be an exemplary individual. However, I am uncertain as to whether you are the optimal choice for this undertaking. I must admit that I am weary of my current situation. I am tired of living in this remote locale. Please do not misconstrue my words. I hold a deep affection for this place. It is my home. However, the male population is severely limited. Are either elderly or married, so I occasionally experience feelings of solitude. Would you kindly elucidate the circumstances surrounding your parents? Would they be displeased if you were to pursue a relationship with me? Jerry inquired, and my father advised me to consider the possibility of a romantic involvement with you. He indicated that you would be a valuable addition to our family. Previously, he had been involved with a woman and had expressed that she was not a worthwhile investment of his time and energy. I do not believe you have mentioned that you are involved with an older individual. Otherwise, my father would not have considered the possibility of a relationship with you. She responded with a hint of amusement. This is somewhat surprising. Jerry interjected, I'm not a virgin. I'm quite familiar with men. He elaborated, one man, a boy, actually. We both grew up here, so we were already aware of these circumstances. We experimented with it, but I'm not awed. I believe I would prefer to be with you. If we decide that we want to be together, I will never cheat on you. You can be absolutely sure of this. I already know what you can do in this case. She giggled. Jerry didn't have to think about it long. What will we tell you? Come on, what is there? Holding hands, Jerry and I informed her that we would be leaving and returning the following morning. He then proceeded to resume his work. Jerry was visibly perplexed, and Molly merely smiled. She explained that her parents were farmers and that they were well versed in the subject of sexual intercourse. She further elaborated that it was a natural phenomenon and that everyone and everything was engaged in it. Jerry was at a loss for words, as he had never encountered such a situation. Such a woman was in his life, and it was evident that she desired to be with him. There was nothing inherently problematic about her, but there was something about her that made him feel uneasy. As they made their way to the motel, Jerry found himself struggling to maintain his composure. The situation was further complicated by the presence of Molly, who was bare-chested next to him. They had barely reached the open highway when she pulled her t-shirt over her head. Molly removed her shirt, which was in accordance with Jerry's initial observation that she was attractive. However, he attempted to decelerate, but she prevented him from doing so. She informed him that the first time should be in bed by the time they reached their destination, and he would be prepared. She then reached out and placed her hand on his trousers. One day, Jerry requested that she put on a shirt. He was compelled to remove his shirt because even while accelerating his large diesel V8 engine, he found himself unable to refrain from touching the trucker, who had identified her as Hal 95Me PHH and was driving a large semi-truck. This individual was aware of her presence. Jerry informed her as the enormous truck came to a stop to the right, and the driver extended his neck to look out the window. He had just passed her at approximately 70 miles per hour. She responded with a giggle. She continued to lick her lips, indicating that she found the situation amusing. She then sat up and threw her shoulders back, displaying a confident and self-assured demeanor. She then looked at the man and stuck out her tongue. God, Jerry muttered under his breath. She removed her shirt and entered the room, but as soon as the door closed, she immediately took it off. Jerry was accustomed to making love with his wife, Shelley. She was always eager and impatient. In contrast, Molly was insatiable and eager to engage in sexual intercourse. She desired him to mount her and penetrate her before he even removed his pants. Her body was more slender at the waist and hips. Her breasts were high and firm, indicative of youth. They spent the majority of the night exploring each other's bodies. Jerry inquired about her experience with Molly around 11 p.m. The following morning, she contacted her father to inform him that they were taking the day off and would not be returning. He responded with laughter. She then climbed back onto what served as her bed by evening. Jerry was in love with this woman, despite knowing very little about her. However, he was not concerned about this lack of knowledge. He wanted her to join him for dinner at a small local cafe. He told her, "Do you mean only us, the regulars?" She replied, "Yes, I want you to belong to me." Jerry was taken aback by his father's serious demeanor. He had expected a more light-hearted response. His father proceeded to elaborate, stating that he considered Jerry to be a commendable breeder. This was a surprising revelation, given Jerry's lack of experience in the field. Molly, on the other hand, reacted with amusement. She inquired about their future residence. Jerry was uncertain about this aspect. His father, however, seemed to have a plan. He stated that they could start with their current circumstances. This response left Jerry perplexed. He had not considered this as a potential solution. He was curious to see how things would unfold if he were to fully commit to Molly. "Forever," she smiled. "Molly, I'm falling in love with you," he said. "Don't do this, not now," she replied. "I like being with you, but I'm not entirely sure." On the following day, Jerry had completed the proposals and contracts and proceeded to meet with Sam Martin and his wife. Following the implementation of a few minor alterations, the man affixed his signature to the documents and shook Jerry's hand. Moments later, Molly emerged from the room with 2 suitcases. The couple regarded her with astonishment, then turned to Jerry. "I am accompanying Jerry," she stated. For the first time, Jerry observed the smile vanish from Dia's face, but she swiftly replaced it. Sam rose from his seat, approached her, and embraced her. Then, he turned to Jerry and stated, "You have a plethora of responsibilities. You must address them." He spoke in a markedly more grave tone than Jerry had previously encountered. It became evident that he was aware of the situation. Jerry nodded in agreement. "Molly isn't going anywhere," he said. "Dad," Molly interjected. "Shut up, honey. I like Jerry. I think he's a good person, but he needs to sort himself out. He still has a wife, and there's no way in hell you two could start a life together." Jerry knew the man was right. He saw the sincerity in Molly's eyes. Her shoulders slumped as she was so young and impulsive. However, there was no way she could resist this powerful man. After dinner, he shook hands with everyone and hugged Molly for a long time. He informed her that he would be back as soon as he could. He told her that it was okay and that Jerry would wait for her. Tears welled up in her eyes as he climbed into his truck. He entered his vehicle and the lengthy return journey appeared to be interminable. Jerry was reluctant to return. He had now discovered the one place on earth where he would prefer to be. The trials were not imminent, and there were occasions when Jerry almost forgot about what he had to confront. During the weekends, his work did not distract him from his personal matters. He made lengthy journeys to visit Molly, Sam and Dewey, who did not express any disapproval of his presence. After a few weeks, he felt as though he had been accepted by them. He even gained a little weight, and it was challenging to avoid it when he considered how Dewey cooked every lunch, which consisted of mountains of food, and all of it was delicious. He discovered that Molly had the same culinary abilities as her mother and was also a diligent student. She was adept at handling the ranch animals. He once observed as a large calf, injured in some way, suddenly collapsed as it was being led into the pen. He managed to grab the calf by the tail, but this resulted in him being dragged around the field for several minutes. While she laughed at his antics, he was nevertheless able to decelerate the movement of the large animal. Molly ducked under the tail and reached out to grasp the opposite front leg, applying her weight to push the animal with her shoulder. This maneuver caused the animal to fall, landing on top of Molly. In her hand, she then observed a piece of rope. She promptly secured her hind legs, prompting the animal to cease struggling and vocalize distress. Jerry's mother promptly arrived on the scene, visibly enraged. He would have fled the scene, but Molly remained stationary, compelling him to remain. She tossed him a thin stick, prompting Jerry to question its purpose. He was expected to utilize the item in question. The cow lowered her head and sniffled, throwing dirt into the air with her front hooves. Molly simply poked her in the face with her stick, which caused the cow to cease her actions. Jerry did the same when the cow gave up and turned to him. Together, they drove the cow away and closed the gate. Subsequently, the gate was returned to the large calf. The injury to the calf's shoulder blade, which had been caused by a piece of wire, was skillfully sutured by the operator. After applying a topical ointment from the back of the ATV, the calf was released. The calf stood for a moment, then sat down and began to eat. Opening the gate, the cow approached the calf and promptly began to feed it. She seemed to indicate that everything would be fine. However, Jerry noted that the cow had intended to kill him. He suggested that the cow was merely attempting to protect her calf, which was a reasonable assumption. However, it is important to note that cows are generally docile creatures. In contrast, sheep can be more challenging to manage. She smiled. Jerry had already observed the lead cow study the hole in the fence with particular interest and then begin to widen it until it was large enough to crawl through. The next moment, the entire herd was on the other side of the fence. When he helped herd the herd into the pen, he discovered a passage in the barn. The animals were required to enter the pen one at a time for shearing. Once the entire herd was in the pen, Jerry secured the gate. He then took approximately a dozen steps, at which point a large sheep approached the gate, examined the lock, and then threw it back. The gate swung open and the animal hit it with its head, allowing the entire herd to exit the pen. The animals were then released back into the open field, which caused a certain degree of commotion. 2 small border collies ran out and surrounded the herd, and the animals froze, staring at them. The herd remained motionless and stared back until one of the dogs looked away, at which point the entire herd turned and walked back into the pen. The observer then walked over and opened the latch on the gate. He then proceeded to disengage the chain bolt, which he lifted and rotated until it was fully disengaged. He was aware of the gate's operational nuances. Jerry then directed his attention to the 2 dogs, who appeared to convey a disapproving sentiment as they gazed at him directly. This interaction persisted for several weeks. He traversed a considerable distance. He proceeded to the Hug Ranch, where he began assisting with domestic tasks. Sam and Dewey were observing him closely, and he was aware of their scrutiny, yet he found the experience enjoyable for a time. He nearly forgot about his former life, becoming wholly immersed in a way of living that was entirely unfamiliar to him. Reality reasserted itself when he unlocked the door to his modest apartment in the city. One day, the telephone rang. Jerry was surprised to hear Shelley's voice, as there had been no contact between them for some time. "How are you?" she inquired. Jerry thought she wanted to discuss their impending divorce. However, there was little to talk about, as Shelley had already been evicted from the house, which was on the market. Jerry was aware of this. The house was unlikely to sell quickly, and even if it did, there would be no money to fight for. "I'm fine." "What do you need?" he asked. The lawyer stated that it was unfortunate that he had resumed his professional activities, as this could have resulted in a significantly reduced financial obligation. While Shelley's work at the agency was temporarily suspended due to her injury, Jerry reviewed the medical documentation and recognized that she was attempting to leverage this situation to her advantage. However, there were no grounds for further dispute regarding the terms. He was in a position to pay. "I also wanted you to know that I forgive you." She added, "What I forgive you, I understand that you were angry and did not want to offend me." "I'm not joking," he said. "No, I'm not kidding. I still love you. I have always loved you. Maybe we could go somewhere," he suggested. "Have dinner and talk." "We could go somewhere and have dinner and talk." Jerry recognized the intonation in her voice, it was familiar to him. "Outfits you like so much, maybe without underwear you'd like it. I miss you." The tone of her voice became seductive, although the words were calculated to provoke him. This also worked. "Shelley, you were the one who initiated the affair. There is no way in the world I will go on a date with you." "Oh, don't be like that. I'm trying. In an effort to achieve a state of peace with you, I informed you that I forgave you for this. I am aware that you did not desire this outcome." She responded in turn, "In what sense did you not want this?" "It would be better if I killed you and that bastard Barnes. Do you forgive me?" Jerry suddenly became enraged and shouted into the phone, "Art can affect me in ways that..." It became evident that she was unable to establish a connection with Honey. The tone of her voice conveyed a distinct unpleasantness. This was followed by an extended period of silence, which only served to exacerbate Jerry's frustration. He was determined to proceed with the task at hand. However, a faint murmur in the background and the subsequent silence of the phone prompted him to question the nature of the preceding sound. Despite his initial anger, Jerry found himself in a prison cell once more, handcuffed and surrounded by 3 large individuals. His lawyer inquired as to the rationale behind his actions, questioning why he had threatened her. Jerry was quick to clarify that he had not threatened her, emphasizing that she had merely called him and informed him of her intentions. "Forgive me, I cheated on you." "She must be insane." "Well, they have a tape of you threatening her in Barnes." "This is a violation of the restraining order." He protested. "They say something else. They mean the son of A." Jerry then realized that he had been duped. The lawyer proceeded to play a brief audio recording, which revealed the voice of the accused shouting shortly after a voice with a pleasant timbre invited him to dinner. The lawyer was informed that the recording had been altered, and a sense of unease began to take hold. The lawyer expressed concern, stating that the incident was not a positive development. The judge, who had been observing the proceedings, then expressed his disapproval. At this point, Jerry's expression became noticeably displeased. He then shook his head in disagreement. It should be noted that only a portion of the entire recording was played for the court. In comparison to the previous excerpts, Shell's voice sounded pleasant. She appeared to be attempting to resolve the situation and make peace. In contrast, Jerry's voice was heard screaming in rage. He was aware that his own voice sounded completely insane. "This man is too dangerous to be left free." The prosecutor argued that it was dangerous to allow the defendant to remain at large, stating that it was evident that the case constituted a deliberate attempt to frame the defendant. The prosecutor highlighted that the defendant had endured significant distress due to his wife's infidelity with Mr. Barnes. The prosecutor asserted that the evidence presented was clear and that the case was nothing more than an attempt to seek retribution. Jerry's lawyer attempted to present a different perspective, arguing that the judge stated that it was indeed the client who made the threat. There was no evidence of an affair. Jerry was returned to prison, where he remained for several days, weeks, and then months. His lawyer stopped by several times to provide updates. One day, a young woman came to see him. She introduced herself as additionally, Carrie Anderson, also an attorney, was consulted. However, Jerry was reluctant to engage further with legal counsel, having already accepted his impending incarceration. He appeared to have resolved the matter and was content with the support of his social circle. Sam Martin and his wife were among those who offered assistance. Jerry was initially uncertain about involving them further, but they persisted. They believed that Jerry would eventually comprehend the situation. Jerry was initially perplexed by their insistence. However, he eventually acquiesced, acknowledging the value of their input. The situation in the small town began to develop rapidly. Despite Mr. Art Barnes's attempts to exert control, external forces quickly gained influence. It did not take long for those outside the situation to obtain irrefutable evidence that the tape had been edited. By tracking Jerry's cell phone, they traced the call to Art Barnes's work phone. This information emerged just 3 days after the initial developments. Jerry was released on bail shortly thereafter. His first action upon returning to freedom was to retrieve his truck and head to Idaho. He was greeted by Molly, who embraced him with great enthusiasm. Sam and Dewey stood on the porch, radiant. "I want to thank you, but why did you do this for me?" he inquired, his gaze fixed on Molly. Sam beamed back at him. That evening, Jerry sat down and proceeded to recount the events of the day for the first time. Despite having informed Molly of the developments, he was surprised to learn that they were already aware of the majority of what had transpired. As he lay in bed with Molly, clinging to her as tightly as he could, he felt a sense of calm. Something had shifted, yet he was uncertain as to what it was. "I'm ready," she said. In a hushed tone, Jerry conveyed the information to him. His demeanor was one of elation, and he expressed his acceptance of her. Molly, in his eyes, became his lifelong companion. After a brief period of just 1 month, the day of the trial arrived. The judge was a different individual, but he still possessed a stern and unpleasant demeanor. The proceedings unfolded in a manner that Jerry had anticipated. Both Barnes and Shelley testified that they were engaged in a routine business meeting. Due to the length of the day, Shelley took a moment to refresh herself in her private bathroom. They then stated that Jerry suddenly entered the room and began firing shots. Jerry's legal counsel countered with the assertion that the incident occurred at 2 a.m. At midnight hours in the bedroom of the house in question, the prosecution presented a large diagram which explained their version of events. It showed Barnes sitting on the bed reading when Jerry broke into the house. In response, Jerry's team asked how he could have rushed in and started shooting. Barnes should have stood up and moved forward since he was in his own bedroom and was attacked by a very large Mr. Barnes. It was self-defense. The defense argued that Barnes could not have known that he was invited to the residence. They suggested that he might have been a robber or even a rapist. Jerry defended his own home. The jury members glanced at each other. Shelley was again called to testify. She again protested her innocence, stating that she had never had an affair with Art Barnes. However, photographs emerged showing her and Art Barnes in compromising situations. The defense argued that Jerry knew about these photographs. They suggested that they were taken after the incident. Both were discharged from the hospital. It occurred to him that Barnes had been shot in the groin, but from the photographs it was evident that the injury was healing well. Shelley faltered and lost her composure when she saw the photographs. This was the work of a highly skilled private detective agency. For some individuals, the photographs were unexpected. They were displayed on a large screen. It was clear to Jerry that Shelley the photographs revealed that Barnes was probably not larger than him. Despite the prosecution's attempts to protest against the explicit nature of the images, it was too late. The courtroom was filled with gasps as people turned to look at what was happening. Art Barnes's wife jumped to her feet and screamed at him, "You are a son of a bitch," before leaving the room. He looked completely miserable. Jerry looked at Carrie Anderson, her demeanor remained unchanged. The judge, in a stern tone, rejected the prosecution's continued objections and ordered the presentation of the following photographs, taken by police. The images depicted a rumpled bed, a magazine on the opposite side, and the fact that Shelley was lying naked after shooting her. No one attempted to conceal anything. Jerry observed Shelley sitting to the side. During the subsequent discussion in the hallway, Carrie revealed that the case would not be dismissed, despite the mitigating circumstances. The prosecutor inquired whether the shooting of the wife was justified, emphasizing that the act of shooting one's spouse is a grave offense. He suggested that the defense might attempt to portray the incident as an act of passion or an uncontrolled outburst of rage, potentially seeking sympathy from the jury. However, he noted that this avenue was no longer viable, given the late stage of the proceedings. "This judge will never do that. How about I just tell the truth?" Jerry suggested. "We can try. What would you say?" "Say that drove me crazy. For this, you will be charged with assault with a deadly threat. Do you understand?" "I understand, but this is true." Carrie sighed, then nodded. "What is your verdict?" the judge asked. "Not guilty," the jury foreman replied, holding papers in his hands. The defendant was found guilty of the charge of first assault. The courtroom was silent as the judge delivered his verdict. Jerry had already noticed that Art Barnes was absent, as was Shelley. The judge was seen shuffling papers. Jerry was then instructed to stand. He was informed that he did not have the right to shoot people without justification. The judge then shook his head. Carrie informed him that this judge was prone to lengthy discourse when imposing sentences, so he remained silent and awaited the verdict. He then commented, "At least you didn't kill anyone, which is a positive outcome." Upon observing the courtroom, he was met with laughter. The judge then brandished his gavel and grinned, but quickly concealed his expression. "Sex, lies, treason, violence, and dirty little plans for revenge, my God, the lengths some people go to." He then looked down at Jerry. 5 years, he said. Jerry's heart sank. He was given a probationary period, during which the time served was counted. The judge then stood up and left without looking back. Jerry stood up and hugged Carrie. He then turned to look at Molly, who was sitting in the hall. She smiled and cried at the same time. The sun was shining as Jerry walked. Upon exiting the courtroom, Jerry was accompanied by Molly. The subsequent divorce hearing, which took place a few days later, saw minimal contention. The lawyer representing Molly was present, yet she herself was absent. The stipulation of alimony was rescinded due to the revelation that Shelley's income exceeded Jerry's. It is challenging to generate a substantial income while incarcerated. As Jerry departed the office, the sun was also shining. Dodge emitted a low, contented purr as they traversed the nearly empty highway toward Idaho. Molly leaned back in her seat, her blouse removed and her breasts exposed to the morning sun. They were nearing the truck. Jerry warned her, "I don't care. Let him have fun. You don't mind, do you?" The sun was particularly pleasant that morning. Jerry just laughed, turned on his turn signal and drove around the big truck. They were climbing a long slope, so that the driver she inquired as to his opinion of their impending nuptials as soon as he resumed driving in the correct lane. He replied that he had no objections, but then asked whether she desired to engage in the act. She confirmed that she did, and then asked why they had not used protection. He responded that they had never used it. She then asked what this meant, and he explained that she had reminded him of an incident that had occurred during their time together in the house. She asked if he recalled her telling him that she was ready. He confirmed that she had indeed said this and that it was what she had meant. He inquired as to whether she meant that she was ready to be with him, and she confirmed that she was. He then asked if she was ready, and she replied that she was. He then teased her, stating that her father had a gun. She laughed, and he responded with a grin. The sun was still shining when they arrived at the large ranch house. She expressed a desire to go down to the stream, and he asked why. She explained that she wanted to properly welcome him home, and he grinned in response. As they were getting out of the truck, Sam and Dewey came out of the Molly waved to them and then took Jerry's arm. He looked back as she pulled him down the hill towards the creek. Sam and Dewey laughed as they walked back into the house, also holding hands on the soft grassy bank. She disrobed, naked facing each other. He somehow knew what to do. He reached out and took both her hands in his. They looked into each other's eyes for a very long time, then she slid into their embrace was slow and deliberate, accompanied by the symphony of birdsong and the muted chorus of a nearby stream. As they lay in each other's arms, they basked in the serene ambience. In the distance, a resounding bellow echoed through the air. Jerry threw his head back, attempting to emulate the sound. Molly was overcome with laughter, prompting Jerry to suggest another location. He smiled, feeling a sense of well-being. They proceeded to dress and subsequently returned to the residence. Jerry was aware that, for the first time in his life, he was truly at home. Subscribe to our channel to ensure that your second-in-command does not engage in infidelity, and proceed to listen to the subsequent narrative, as it is of a more explicit nature than the previous one. If you are under the age of 18, abstain from listening to the following narrative.